Kalorama, a recorded books hybrid imprint, presents Spin Dictators, The Changing Face of Tyranny in the 21st Century, by Sergei Guriev and Daniel Treisman. Read by David Vries. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures and tables present in the print and e-book formats of the book. Preface. Early in the 21st century, global politics hit a major milestone. For the first time, the number of democracies in the world surged past the tally of authoritarian states. As this seismic third wave crested, experts identified 98 countries with free government compared to 80 still controlled by dictators. The optimism was infectious. New information technologies, globalization, and economic development seemed to be calling times up on strongman rule. As countries modernized, tyranny was becoming obsolete. The celebrations did not last long. In fact, they hardly got started. Within a few years, the advance of freedom had petered out, yielding what some quickly termed a democratic recession. A dramatic financial crisis born in the United States sent the global economy crashing, undercutting faith in Western governance. By 2019, the number of democracies had fallen to 87, while that of dictatorships was back up to 92. In the West, liberalism was proving little match for populism, while in the East, all eyes were turned to China's meteoric rise. The millennial exuberance gave way to a sense of gloom. Today's political pessimism is a bit overdone. By most measures, global democracy remains not far below its all-time high. But the dark mood points to a genuine puzzle. Even if dictatorships are not taking over, the question is how they can survive at all and even prosper in an ultra-modern world. Why, after all the brutal manias of the 20th century, from fascism to communism, have been discredited, do we still see new autocracies rising from the ashes? And what to make of the strongmen who are embracing tools of modernity, using Western technologies to challenge Western ways of life? With its unmatched population and explosive growth, China has been pegged as the counter-argument to liberal democracy. Its economic success, hardly dented by the 2008-9 slump or even the 2020 COVID crisis, seems to contradict the equation of development with popular rule. And yet, outside the metropolises of Beijing and Shanghai and the glittering entrepôts of Hong Kong and Macau, most of the country remains quite poor, its population still manageable by industrial era and even pre-industrial methods. The bigger puzzle is the survival of unfree government in affluent societies such as Singapore and Russia, where university degrees are more common than in most Western democracies. Do such cases offer a glimpse into an authoritarian future? This book is an attempt to explain the nature of current dictatorships. It grew out of a mixture of research and personal experience. We both spent years tracking the rise of Putin's system in Russia through academic analysis and first-hand observation. His regime came to seem to us not unique, but rather an exemplar of trends that were reshaping authoritarian states worldwide, from Hugo Chávez's Venezuela and Viktor Orbán's Hungary to Mahathir Mohamad's Malaysia and Nursultan Nazarbayev's Kazakhstan. Observers struggle with what to call these leaders. Some fall for their pantomime of democracy, others offer awkward analogies to historical strongmen, labeling Putin a czar or Erdogan a sultan. We see all these rulers as converging on a novel, though not unprecedented, approach that can preserve autocracy for a while in even modern globalized settings. The key to this is deception. Most dictators today conceal their true nature. So the first step is to understand how they operate. In the chapters that follow, we explore why these regimes emerged, how they work, what threats they pose, and how the West can best resist them. The book is based on theoretical and empirical research that we have published in economics and political science journals. Our hope here is to make the key ideas more accessible. Wherever possible, we back up our claims with references to published studies, including our own, and data. A variety of tables and graphs appear in an online supplement accessible via press.princeton.edu/books/spin-dictators. We refer to this material in the respective chapter's closing sections titled Checking the Evidence. Over the years, many colleagues and friends have shared thoughts on the ideas we present here. We are grateful to Alberto Alesina, Maxime Ananyev, Marina Atsimonti, Timothy Besley, Bruce Bueno de Mesquita, Brett Carter, Chao-Yo Chung, George Derpanopoulos, Tiberiu Dragu, Georgi Igorov, Cherian George, Lisa George, Francesco Giavazzi, Gilad Levy, Andrew Little, Elias Papaioannou, Torsten Persson, Richard Portas, Andrea Prat, Eugenio Proto, Gerard Rowland, Arturas Rosenas, Miklos Sarvari, Paul Seabright, Daniel Seidman, David Skarbek, Konstantin Sonin, Francesco Squintani, Owen Stafford, David Stromberg, Guido Tabellini, Gergely Ughelyi, Xian Wang, Feng Yang, and Fabrizio Silibotti. Cevat Aksoy, Anders Aslund, Jonathan Avis, Danny Bahar, Carlos Bois, Maxime Boichko, Javier Corrales, Tim Fry, Barbara Geddes, Scott Gelbach, Susan Landisman, Lee Morgan Besser, Peter Pomeretsev, Molly Roberts, Danny Roderick, Michael Ross, Andrei Schleifer, Andrei Soldatov, Art Stein, Milan Zvolik, Adam Seidel, Ferenc Sux, Michel Treisman, Josh Tucker, David Yang, and Ekaterina Zhuravskaya read all or parts of the manuscript and offered invaluable comments, as did two anonymous readers. We thank Andrei Schleifer in particular for encouraging us to develop our arguments into a book. Of course, we are solely responsible for any remaining mistakes. Kevin Gatter, Nikita Melnikov, and Ekaterina Nemova provided excellent research assistance. At Princeton University Press, we benefited from the expert guidance and encouragement of Bridget Flannery McCoy, Sarah Caro, now at Basic Books, Eric Crayon, and Elena Chikhanov. Introduction. Chapter 1. Fear and Spin. Dictators have been changing. The classic tyrants of the 20th century, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, were larger-than-life figures responsible for the deaths of millions. They set out to build new civilizations within their tightly guarded and sometimes expanding borders. That meant controlling not just people's public behavior but also their private lives. To do that, each created a disciplined party and a brutal secret police. Not every old-school dictator was a genocidal killer or the prophet of some utopian creed, but even the less bloodthirsty ones were expert at projecting fear. Terror was their all-purpose tool. However, toward the end of the century, something changed. Strong men around the world started turning up to meetings in conservative suits instead of military uniforms. Most stopped executing their opponents in front of packed football stadiums. Many flew to the annual business conference in the Swiss resort of Davos to schmooze with the global elite. These new dictators hired pollsters and political consultants, staged citizen call-in shows, and sent their children to study at universities in the West. They did not loosen their grip over the population. Far from it, they worked to design more effective instruments of control, but they did so while acting the part of democrats. Not all autocrats have made this leap. North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Syria's Bashar al-Assad would fit well into a scrapbook of 20th-century despots. In China and Saudi Arabia, rulers have digitized the old fear-based model instead of replacing it. But the global balance has shifted. Among leaders of non-democracies today, The representative figure is no longer a totalitarian tyrant like Joseph Stalin, a sadistic butcher like Idi Amin, or even a reactionary general like Augusto Pinochet. He is a suave manipulator like Hungary's Viktor Orbán or Singapore's Lee Hsien Loong, a ruler who pretends to be a humble servant of the people. This new model is based on a brilliant insight. The central goal remains the same, to monopolize political power. But today's strongmen realize that in current conditions, violence is not always necessary or even helpful. Instead of terrorizing citizens, a skillful ruler can control them by reshaping their beliefs about the world. He can fool people into compliance and even enthusiastic approval. In place of harsh repression, the new dictators manipulate information. Like spin doctors in a democracy, they spin the news to engineer support. They are spin dictators. The Putin puzzle. We came to this subject through a particular case. In March 2000, Russians elected a former KGB lieutenant colonel with little political experience as their president. Vladimir Putin claimed to accept the principles of democracy, although his instincts clearly pulled in a different direction. For some time it was not obvious, perhaps even to him, where he would take his country. As the economy boomed, his ratings soared. Putin preserved democratic appearances while emphasizing the need to build a cohesive modern state. At first, centralizing control seemed reasonable after the turbulent 1990s. But he did not stop, and after a while, the measures he was taking to strengthen executive power, his power, were visibly undermining checks and balances. The scope for political contestation narrowed. The battering ram that broke through democratic constraints was Putin's own popularity. He used it to get supporters elected to the parliament and to bully the country's unruly regional governors. With a mix of law enforcement and business leverage, he tamed the previously tycoon-dominated but competitive media. Even as he kept the form of national elections, he and his aides left less and less to chance. Putin and his United Russia Party could almost always have won a free and fair vote, but they still used pressure and tricks to inflate their landslides. Democracies are never perfect. For a time, the flaws in Russia's politics looked much like those in other middle-income, semi-free countries such as Argentina, Mexico, and Romania. Almost all such states suffer from corruption, tainted elections, and insecure press freedom. Political leaders often abuse their authority over police and judges. Still, these flaws typically coexist with some popular accountability. But by the time Putin returned to the presidency in 2012, after 4 years as prime minister, he was clearly operating from a different playbook. In late 2011, a wave of demonstrations had swept Moscow and other cities over fraud in that year's parliamentary election. The sight of up to 100,000 people in the streets alarmed Putin and his advisers. They struck back, arresting peaceful protesters, squeezing disloyal politicians out of parliament, and harassing the remaining independent media. We both watched closely as this process unfolded. Sergei headed a Moscow university specializing in economics and advised the Russian government. Daniel was a professor in the West studying Russia's post-communist politics. In the spring of 2013, Sergei received a visit from some of Putin's security agents, who confiscated his emails and copied his computer hard drive. He had helped write a critical analysis of the latest court verdict against Mikhail Khodorkovsky, a billionaire who had been jailed on a dubious charge. Apparently, the Kremlin did not like this analysis. Soon after, Sergei moved to France. The system Putin forged in Russia is distinctly authoritarian, but it is an authoritarianism of an unfamiliar type. Unlike Stalin, Putin has not murdered millions and imprisoned millions more. Even Leonid Brezhnev, who led the Soviet Union in its later, softer phase from 1964 to 1982, locked thousands of dissidents in labor camps and psychiatric hospitals, banned all opposition parties, and held no elections that were even slightly competitive. Opposition rallies were out of the question. All media broadcast a mind-numbing ideological discourse. Foreign radio stations were jammed, and most citizens were kept from international travel by a rusting Iron Curtain. Putin's regime, now more than 20 years old, is different. It does not run on Soviet-style censorship. One can publish newspapers or books that call the man in the Kremlin a dictator. The catch is that most people do not want to read them. Nor has the system run on fear, although that may now be changing. Occasional acts of political violence occurred, usually in murky circumstances, but the Kremlin always denied responsibility. And although Putin's political opponents are increasingly anxious, most Russians have not seemed scared. Many have quite readily accepted a skewed vision of reality that Putin's media helped to shape. The authorities under communism, with their May Day parades and ritual elections, tried to create the illusion of consent. Under Putin, many Russians consented to illusions. As we examined the system that was emerging, we realized Putin's style of rule was not unique. From Hugo Chavez in Venezuela to Viktor Orbán in Hungary, non-democratic leaders were using a common set of techniques. Quite a few drew inspiration from the pioneer of this new brand, Lee Kuan Yew. Starting in the 1960s, the long-serving leader of Singapore had shaped his country into a formidable model of political control. That might sound surprising. Singapore claims to be a democracy and is often taken for one. It holds regular elections. But a key innovation of the new autocrats is precisely to claim to be democratic. "You are entitled to call me whatever you like," Lee once retorted to a critical journalist, "but do I need to be a dictator when I can win, hands down?" He failed to add that always winning, hands down, was the calling card of a modern dictator. 20th Century Tyrants. What exactly is a dictatorship? In the Roman Republic, where the term originated, it meant a temporary grant of absolute power to a leader to handle some emergency. These days, the word is used to refer to any non-democratic government. It has become synonymous with authoritarianism and autocracy. We follow that usage in this book. A democracy, in turn, is a state whose political leaders are chosen in free and fair elections in which all, or almost all, adult citizens have the right to vote. A liberal democracy combines free elections with the rule of law, constitutionally protected civil liberties, and institutional checks and balances. Before the 20th century, no states were fully democratic. Even those that held free and fair elections denied most women the vote. Only 5 countries had universal male suffrage in 1900, and not the United States, where African Americans were disenfranchised in the Jim Crow South. Besides a handful of restricted suffrage republics like the United States, most political systems fell into 3 baskets: monarchies, in which a king or queen ruled, sometimes constrained by a constitution and a partly representative parliament; oligarchies, in which factions of the rich governed; and colonies, administered by a foreign power. That changed in the 20th century as democracy spread in 3 great waves. The first peaked around 1920 as new states splintered from the European empires destroyed by World War I, and Western governments liberalized their voting rules. The second occurred between the late 1940s and early 1960s as the winners of World War II imposed democracy on the losers, and former colonies in Asia and Africa held elections. The third wave, a true tsunami, started with Portugal's Carnation Revolution in 1974, picked up speed as communism collapsed around 1990, and reached its apex in the mid-2000s. By 2015, more than half of all countries containing 53% of the world's population were electoral democracies, and about 1 in 4 was a liberal democracy. Yet even as democracy expanded, dictatorship did not disappear. The first 2 democratic waves were followed by reversals. In 2 demoralizing periods, free government seemed to crumble. First came the 1930s, a low, dishonest decade in W. H. Auden's phrase, when authoritarians swept the European continent. Dictatorship did not just rebound, it mutated. A few monarchies hung on in countries such as Yugoslavia and Romania. Yet alongside them, new forms of tyranny emerged that were better adapted to the mass politics that democracy itself had ushered in. During and after World War I, millions of politically inexperienced workers and veterans cast ballots for the first time. They did so in the wake of a global bloodletting that had discredited the liberal belief in ever-continuing progress. Two new types of regime, communist and fascist, set out to mobilize the lower classes. Each promised a complete transformation of society. Vladimir Lenin's Bolsheviks aimed to build communism in the remnants of the Russian Empire. The Nazis, under Adolf Hitler, planned an Aryan empire. On taking power, both forced the public to adopt an ideology distilled from the leaders' scribblings. Raymond Aron called these secular religions. Like traditional faiths, they stated truths not to be questioned, redirected attention from current hardship to a utopian future, and defined rituals that could sort true believers from heretics. Both Lenin and Hitler inspired imitators in Europe and beyond. A third new model, corporatism, aimed not to mobilize the masses into politics, but to demobilize them into private life. Conservatives, such as Portugal's Antonio Salazar and Spain's Francisco Franco, wanted to restore social deference and Catholic hierarchy. In place of noisy parliaments, they created consultative chambers where selected spokesmen of social groups could advise the leader. Like the other two forms, corporatism was born out of disgust with the present. But while fascists and communists sought to escape into an imagined future, corporatists hoped to return to an imagined past. Fascism died in the flames of World War II, while communism survived and spread. Corporatism hung on in Spain and Portugal with distant echoes in regimes such as Juan Perón's in Argentina. The second authoritarian surge began in the 1960s as post-war democratization ran out of steam. Fragile post-colonial republics fell to ruthless strongmen, while military juntas seized power in economically volatile Latin America. In this crop of dictators, some aimed, like the communists and fascists, to mobilize people into active support. Others sought, like the corporatists, to quiet them down. Socialist revolutionaries like Nasser in Egypt, mobilizational, shared the world stage with free-market reactionaries like Pinochet in Chile, demobilizational, and kleptocrats like Mobutu in Zaire, demobilizational. Aging communist regimes often progressed from mobilization to demobilization, still clinging to the same revolutionary doctrines which just grew ever more ritualized. As this brief review suggests, 20th-century dictatorships were diverse. Still, most shared certain features. To begin with, the vast majority used violent repression. They used it to reshape society, to extract resources from the population, and to defeat and deter opposition. The scale of slaughter varied. Stalin and Mao are blamed for tens of millions of deaths. Some others got by with only thousands, for example Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines, or hundreds, for example Algeria's Chadli Benjedid. During any leader's time in office, the intensity of violence might fluctuate. Some, like General Franco, came in with a bang. Others, like Bashar al-Assad, ramped up the killing later. Either way, most left a bloody trail. And most were deliberately public about their violence. They turned killing into a form of gruesome theater. Some executed political opponents in front of mass audiences. Zaire's Mobutu, for instance, hanged 4 former cabinet ministers before a crowd of 50,000. Or they displayed the bodies of rivals to terrorize their followers. The Haitian strongman François Papadoc Duvalier propped a headless corpse at a street corner in Port-au-Prince for 3 days with a sign reading "Renegade." Almost all adopted a menacing rhetoric to spread anxiety and discourage challenges. Iraq's Saddam Hussein spoke of cutting off necks and evildoers who have thrust their poisoned dagger into our back. Spain's Franco warned of internal subversion by an enemy who lies in wait for opportunities to penetrate. At the same time, most 20th century dictators sought comprehensive control over public communications. Some banned or nationalized all private media. Others censored the press and intimidated journalists. For citizens, observing the rules governing public speech and writing became a test of loyalty, part of the mechanism by which leaders kept order. Criticizing the regime was generally taboo. As with violence, dictators were open about their censorship. Some, like Hitler and Mao, burned books in huge bonfires. Others, like Pinochet, sent soldiers to sanitize the bookstores. The Soviet Union created an explicit censorship agency, Glavlit, to purge all broadcasts and publications of forbidden topics. Penalties could be brutal. Critical writers often disappeared into the prison camps. State propaganda was also overt and often heavy-handed. It was produced in propaganda departments and, in its ubiquity and authoritative style, communicated the regime's strength and determination as much as any particular message. Many dictators sought to isolate their countries. Quarantine was usually incomplete. Most authoritarian states traded with their neighbors. Some, when they thought they could get away with it, invaded them. But virtually all viewed the outside world with suspicion. Unreliable visitors, inconvenient information, and other contaminants were blocked at the frontier. Those admitted were monitored. When technology permitted, dictators jammed foreign broadcasts, and they often censored or banned foreign newspapers. Many kept citizens in, hoping to limit knowledge of the world and conserve manpower. In most communist countries, travel abroad required government approval. In some, such as Albania and Romania, attempting to emigrate without permission was a capital crime. Finally, although totalitarians claimed a mystical identification with their people, the leading 20th century dictators derided parliamentary democracy as practiced in the West. Many claimed to be building new, superior political orders. The most brazen stole the word itself, as in the German Democratic Republic or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, but subverted its meaning, eliminating any hint of pluralism or liberal constraint. Post-colonial leaders like Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah saw multi-party elections as a legacy of imperialists. Parliamentary institutions, he said, offered only chaos, confusion, corruption, nepotism, and misery. Zaire's Mobutu declared simply, "Democracy is not for Africa." Elections, when held, were celebrations of the rulers rather than moments of choice. In short, most dictators maintained power by repressing any opposition, controlling all communications, punishing critics, often imposing an ideology, attacking the ideal of pluralist democracy, and blocking most cross-border flows of people and information. The key principle behind all these practices was simple: intimidation. The typical 20th century autocrat was a dictator of fear. New and improved. And yet, as we looked around in the 2000s, we saw something different. The men calling the shots in most non-democracies seemed to come from another mold. There was Hugo Chavez, a charismatic former paratrooper who commandeered Venezuela's airwaves to romance his country's poor. Chavez marginalized the opposition but jailed few of its members, and most of those, only after a failed coup, almost ousted him. In Singapore, there was Lee Hsien Loong, a brilliant Cambridge-educated technocrat who posted photographs of sunrises on Facebook and served as patron of an NGO promoting kindness. Lee's People's Action Party had won more than 89% of seats in all 13 parliamentary elections since the country's independence, almost rivaling the Soviet Communist Party. Yet, as of 2015, Singapore had only one prisoner of conscience, According to Amnesty International,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?